Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 96 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. And in case you haven't heard, I got hacked. That's right. All of my websites were completely taken down. All of the files gone. All of the email accounts scrapped. I had to restore everything from the databases, start anew, and that kind of took me out of commission for about a week. I'm still battling with it, trying to get the images back up to make the website look like it did before. So I apologize for not putting any episodes out last week. I thought that it was better to try to work on the website and get the website back operational before putting out a new episode. So now that I'm about 90% or so back up with the website, it's time for an episode. And this is one that I feel is very important. I hope that everybody is able to listen to this and get a lot out of this and pass it on, please. I know that there's some brothers and sisters in arms who would love to get the information from this episode. It could help a lot of people. On today's episode, we have Duane France from Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency. Throughout his extensive military and civilian experiences, Duane France has found that one principle continues to stand true time and time again. Audacity is the key to victory in battle. Duane is a retired Army Noncommissioned Officer. During his military service, he participated in 5 combat and operational deployments. Now, working as a mental health therapist, Duane found that his unique blend of experiences and training have led him to be a successful mentor, advocate, and counselor to an underserved population in our country, our fellow veterans. Since his time working as a mental health therapist and advisor with the Colorado 4th Judicial District Veteran Trauma Court, Duane has established himself as a veteran mental health thought leader. On a daily basis, in person and through his writing, he uses his experiences and expertise to bring awareness to veteran mental health and act as a voice on behalf of his fellow brothers and sisters in arms. In Duane's words, I truly believe that the numerous difficulties that some veterans experience, including unemployment, homelessness, and transitioning difficulties, are all related to their mental health in some form or fashion. It is my mission to ensure veterans' mental health does not go unnoticed in our country. And with that, let's jump right into the interview. Duane, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on today because this is going to be a conversation between Paris and France, which I thought was pretty funny.
It was, and I didn't actually think about it until we started connecting. But yeah, pretty amusing.
My entire childhood growing up, people used to call me Paris France.
Well, you'd kind of be surprised about how many people misspell like the word France, like they can actually believe that it is France, the country. So yeah, I can commiserate.
Yeah. So let's start off. Just kind of give me a little bit of background on you.
Okay, sure. So I'm a retired Army Non-Commissioned Officer. I spent 22 years in the Army, retired after 2014. A lot of my military career was spent overseas, not just on deployments, but I did 2 tours to Germany. In between my first and third tour in Germany, I was with the 82nd for 3 years. Jumping out of airplanes, loved it. Became a jump master while I was there. Spent some time on recruiting duty, which was pretty interesting and actually led a lot to my leadership development. And then my family and I have been stationed at Fort Carson since 2006. Well, I'd say the family's been at Carson since 2006. I spent that time in Iraq, 06-07, one of the 15-month tours. Then Afghanistan, 9 to 10, back in Afghanistan, 11 to 12. Then finished out my career with 10th Special Forces Group and went to North Africa with them. I did a little bit of Bosnia way back in the last century, 95 to 96. So I've got some of the deployments and understand a lot of the military backup. But as I was looking at retirement, and even before I was looking at retirement, wondering what I wanted to be when I grew up, really got interested in psychology as a basic concept, and then as through some pretty serendipitous moments, had kind of got turned on in the clinical mental health counseling field, and got my degree in my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling in 2015, about 6 or 7 months after I retired. And now I work as a clinical mental health counselor in a couple of different roles. We could probably get into that a little bit later. But I work exclusively with veterans and doing some support for veteran spouses and trying to do some outreach and advocacy for veterans.
Very nice, very nice. And so when your last duty assignment was Colorado Springs, and you just stayed there?
Yeah, it happens a lot for people here in Colorado that this was actually the first place that my wife and I decided that we wanted to stay. Of course, we spent time in Fayetteville, loved Fayetteville and all that it, well, I don't want to say love Fayetteville, but Fayetteville was what it was. And then we spent time in D.C. and we were, this really just isn't for us. But when we got here to Fort Carson, it was really a place for us to kind of put down roots and find a church family and find schools for the kids. So we're really enveloped into the community, and this is where we decided we wanted to stay.
Yeah, it is absolutely beautiful there. I visited last year. I was the MC for the Armed Forces Week concert with the Air Force Academy Band. And that was my first opportunity to get out to Colorado Springs, and I just fell in love with it. It's so beautiful there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's there's so many different things for you to do, and it's not as it's close enough to a big city like Denver, but far enough away. I kind of always my wife's from Knoxville, Tennessee, and she's very much from the country. I'm from a place where I need my pizza delivered and my trash picked up by somebody other than me. So it's a nice balance between it's a small enough city that and of course you can get some land and some space if you go out to the south and the east. But then there's just so many different things with the mountains available, and this is a pretty big military community too. There's the last census showed 84,000 veterans, specifically, not counting the active duty military installations. And so there's a large presence for the military here. It is El Paso County, the county that Colorado Springs is in. It is the only county in the entire United States with 5 military installations within its geographic boundaries. So it's a pretty big military focused town. Wow.
All of those military installations, they have people getting out of the service in the area?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and of course, I'm not familiar with exactly what all the numbers are, but the 3 major ones: Peterson Air Force Base, Fort Carson, and then of course the Air Force Academy, and then you have Schriever out on the Eastern Plains, and then Cheyenne Mountain, NORAD there. But yeah, a lot of the service members, they get here, and it's beautiful, and they end up staying here.
Yeah, I think. If I would have gotten out of the military from there, I would have stayed. I got out at Fort Meade, and I believe you're familiar with Fort Meade, but this is where I stayed when I got out.
Yeah, I mean, and that was a big thing. Like I said, my wife and I, we were at Fort Meade for recruiting duty for 3 years. So I'm familiar with, the Odenton, Laurel, Hanover kind of area. For us, it wasn't really home, but, cost of living is big in the area.
Yeah.
And wanted to move back out west.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's get into a little bit about the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency. How did that get its start?
Good question, and kind of it was a genesis of a bunch of different things. So the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency is a 501c3 nonprofit that we set up in order to serve veterans needing mental health services. But it actually goes a little bit before that. When I first started working in the mental health counseling field, I was working this agency that I'm working with now had a previous incarnation called the Warrior Support Center. And it was part of the Haven Behavioral Health Network. And it specifically focused on active duty service members. And this was really kind of at the height of the conflicts, mainly from Peterson and Carson and some from the Air Force Academy, that needed outpatient mental health counseling services that may have been maybe a little bit more than what, just by volume, that what behavioral health on post could be. So we were essentially an off-post behavioral health provider that had similar services that the active duty bases did. So all of our providers were very familiar with, experienced with working with soldiers, veterans, combat trauma. Sort of as the wars draw down and the DoD was able to increase their services, a lot of that kind of went away. But an aspect of what we did, and when I started in early 2014, was working with the veterans courts. And so our agency, as early as 2012, became the non-VA provider for our local veterans courts. And when I started here, I was seeing exclusively veterans who were with the veteran court. And a lot of these were veterans who, got out of the military and in one way, reason or another found themselves involved in the criminal justice system. And once they pled guilty to a crime and got on probation, then sort of like the coffers were open up to them and the probation department could pay for their services to be able to see a mental health professional. So it was at no cost to the veteran. So that was something, it was always kind of set wrong with me. It was, well, why did we have to wait for a veteran to get crossways with the law before we could, help them with mental health counseling?
Right.
So once I graduated and came on more full-time, they brought me on here, and I consolidated that program, moved it from a grant-based program to a contracted program with the El Paso County Probation Department. On the other side, the Family Care Center, which is a private outpatient, it changed from the Haven Behavioral Health to the Family Care Center and became a private outpatient, maybe 12 or 14 different practitioners. Still all the same, still with the focus of serving veterans and their families. We would get phone calls from veterans who say, hey, I want to talk to somebody, but they didn't have the resources. They didn't have TRICARE. They didn't have, any way to pay, but they still needed the services. And so that led to us going after a particular grant from the National Board of Certified Counselors Foundation, that they funded us for a capacity building grant that enabled us to establish this 501c3. So the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency is a 501c3 that's professionally affiliated with the Family Care Center. So we're two sides to the same coin, essentially. But it provides us, we are sponsored by the Family Care Center and hosted by, we are co-located with the Family Care Center, but we pursue our own grant funding and support veterans for mental health that can't get it in any other way.
Gotcha. And so who is eligible for these services?
Well, and that's a great question too, is that's a big movement in the community mental health counseling field, is to be able to bridge the gaps and cover some of the other spaces. I personally are, writing the program. If you've served one day in the military, then you're eligible. We don't restrict according to combat. We don't restrict according to era. So there are many programs, and it has to do with resources available, but we're not restricted to post 9/11 veterans. We're not restricted to veterans with a bad conduct discharge or other than honorable discharge. And that's one of the things that we saw in the Veterans Court. The primary reason we're available to provide service to the Veterans Court is because veterans will come in the court with an OTH discharge, very rarely with a BCD discharge, and I've never seen anyone with the dishonorable. But we were there to be able to provide services for those veterans that maybe spent less time in the military than what the VA, has for eligibility requirements, or even that we have more flexibility. We have the ability to see a veteran more often that may be available at a local VA. So the eligibility criteria is very broad, and there are a lot of other mental health organizations in the community that are broadening that to be able to provide those services.
Oh, I'm very happy to hear that. I mean, somebody who is a veteran who is having some mental health issues, it shouldn't really matter what they got out or what their issues were that caused them to get out with, other than or dishonorable, whatever those situations are, they still have the same mental health issue that should be addressed, and that strengthens the community as a whole. So it's great that you are bringing these people in as well.
Well, and I think a lot of it is that, and heck, I was there on active duty too. We have a mission to do, and there are certain times when individuals conduct themselves in a way that doesn't lend to good order and discipline. And I had a mission to conduct, and it was, you get chaptered out. I mean, I had to administratively discharge soldiers from the military, because it was the way that it had to be done. There were rules, there were regulations, and somebody with a DUI or, multiple, UA violations, okay, I got it. Thank you for your service, but I have a mission to conduct, and the Army's no longer for you. It depends on how that, happens in each individual's kind of life, but it's the problem with what happens after the military.
So, Duane, what types of mental health challenges do you normally treat?
A lot of community members and maybe even a lot of mental health providers who aren't familiar with the military, they think of the big two, right? PTSD and TBI. Post-traumatic stress disorder, it is not diagnosable. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not as prevalent as many people would think, as perhaps even the media would put out there. And so, of course, we do see veterans with some of that or PTSD. And then traumatic brain injury is obviously a very significant thing that has emerged out of the most recent conflicts. And so concussive blast injuries, research has shown more of, what happens with repeated traumatic brain injury. I lost consciousness on a jump back in the mid 90s or late 90s. Just because how hard it was, how heavy it was. I went home and laid on the living room floor and slept for 18 hours, and it was just, I went to my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and I woke up and she was kind of standing over me, tapping her foot with her arms crossed, saying, "You're going to the doctor." and so I did, and they were like, "Hey, congratulations, big guy, you got a concussion, check that block off on the life list."
Wow.
And, and back then it was, pat you on the rear and head back in the game. Whereas now, understanding, and it was short-lived, it was a minor concussion and there were no side effects. But definitely with a lot of the different things that are happening now, it's paid much more attention to. But then those two things are not the only things that veterans are really kind of dealing with. So, and I can run through a real quick list, and then if anything pops out that we could talk about. But addictions are huge, and so addictions, alcohol, substance use, or alcoholism is really big. It's part of the culture. I was 18 years old in Germany for 3 years, where there is no drinking age, and unfortunately, I took more advantage of it than I should have, probably.
Yeah.
And not only that, prescription drugs there's a lot of pain issues, obviously, with carrying 80, 90 pounds of ruck on your back for a while. And so sometimes there's chronic pain issues, which leads to prescription drugs. And then if a veteran gets out, that's no longer available, and it shifts from prescription drugs to heroin and opiates. And that's a huge aspect of what we've seen. So there's a lot of that. Depression separate from PTSD. A lot of these things kind of overlap, but there's a concept in psychology called learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is just like, once you've just been beat so many times you quit. You can only get the word no so many times before you just say, forget it, and I throw my hands up. And a guy named Martin Seligman back in the mid 70s identified learned helplessness in dogs, and then saw how that translated to humans, to individuals, and it was really sort of the genesis to the idea of resiliency and how do we train resiliency and how to breed resiliency. But I see a lot of veterans that just say, you know what, I've tried so long to make a different thing happen, and it doesn't matter, and so I just kind of roll over and just quit. And so there's a lot of that, this trapped helplessness, and helplessness leads to hopelessness, and I think that there is a lot that has to do with suicide and depression, separate really from kind of traumatic exposure. So if a veteran who is experiencing this depression, kind of this learned helplessness, but they never actually, were witnessed a traumatic event, it's still a thing, and it can kind of all lead to the suicide epidemic. Mm-hmm. Another big aspect of what I see veterans experience is just a lack of meaning and purpose in their lives, which is totally separate, again, from some of these other things. I know that when I was in the Army, I was a small cog in a huge machine, but I was a very important cog. And many veterans were like, I know that I'm just the low man on the totem pole, but I meant something, and the work that I did was meaningful and purposeful to me. And then when they get out and they go to work for a bank, or they go to work for, a restaurant or something like that, somehow they lose that meaning and purpose. And so there's a whole aspect of identity, shifting identity. What is my identity outside of the military? I'm no longer a civilian, or I'm not a civilian at all, and I'm no longer a soldier. There was a podcast by a guy that I know, he was a guest on there, Jeffrey Adamek, who basically was saying, I am no longer allowed to be who I am. He was medically discharged, and he was like, I am no longer literally allowed to be myself. And while it wasn't entirely true, and Jeff talks about how he transferred from that, that's really a lot of veterans say, this is all of my identity, and how do I shift my identity? And I'm no longer jumping out of airplanes or kicking down doors, or even being the guy that somebody goes to when they have a problem with their personnel records, right? And so I'm no longer me, so who am I? So the purpose and meaning and that shift in identity is huge.
Yeah.
Another one, and there's three more, and I'll get through them quick, is the concept of moral injury. And so if PTSD is kind of injury of the behavior, sort of that Pavlovian response of stimulus response, and TBI is an injury of the brain, moral injury is an injury of the soul, meaning what I believe to be right and wrong about the world has been changed fundamentally. We think about a lot of the things that have happened, not just in recent conflicts, but like My Lai in Vietnam, Abu Ghraib, and the things that happened there. These are normal people, right, who were good people, essentially good people, who the environment changed to a certain extent. That bad things happen. You think about, I think in 2011 or 12, there was the issue of the Marines urinating on the corpses, the remains of the enemy. No veteran that I've ever known has seen that and approved of that, but most of them say, I can see how they might have gotten to that point where they thought that was okay. Well, it's not really okay. So there's this concept of moral injury that's separate from PTSD, and that's really where a lot of the guilt and the shame come from. The other aspect is learning how to fulfill needs in different ways. So if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and my basic biological needs are met, my safety needs are met, and I'm learned to meet these needs in a certain way when I'm in the military. When I got out of the military, I didn't know how to integrate into civilian society. I didn't know that my socks needed to match my pants, or that the belt matched my shoes and all this stuff. I had one tie when I was in the Army, and that was my Class A tie, and I wore it for 22. I wore it for my wedding, right? I wore it for everything. And so there's this way for us, when I was in Afghanistan, I didn't have to worry about food or shelter because People, I went to a base and I signed in, and they were able to give me that kind of stuff. I didn't have to learn how to negotiate my own rental contract. When I got to Fort Carson, I had a house within a week or 2 weeks. If I was single soldier, I'd be in the barracks. And then getting out and learning how to meet those needs in a different way is a huge shift for a lot of veterans. And so it's not in Maslow, and his theory is appropriate, but it's not what needs are met, it's how we meet those needs. And sometimes veterans have to learn how to meet those needs. And then the last aspect we see is just the family. The family is really a huge part of the focus of what the veteran is whether they're married, they're not married, they have children, but just how to reintegrate with the family after the military service. So that's the majority. That's all of what I do in about, 5 minutes.
So
lots of stuff.
So with all of those things, there's a lot of different opportunities for healing there. What are the barriers that our veterans are facing that are preventing them from seeking that aid for those things?
Well, that's great. And there's actually two different sets of barriers. You got your internal barriers and then your external barriers. So the internal barriers are the ones that we all know of. The suck it up and drive on mentality, the kind of the internal thoughts and stigma against seeking mental health services. Oh, they're going to think I'm weak, or they're going to think that I'm a wuss, and so it's really challenging to overcome those internal barriers. There's an internal barrier of trust in thinking that if I'm going to go down and I'm going to sit across from this counselor, what's going to happen? The stuff I'm thinking about scares the crap out of me, or sickens me, or keeps me awake at night. What's it going to do to a therapist? I talk to guys, and they'll sit there and tell me, there's guys that said, what, dude, I've been sitting outside your office for about half an hour, and I about turned around and drove away. I had some guys that did turn around and drive away and tried to come back later. So this image of a veteran just white knuckling on a steering wheel, waiting to come into my door. This is the same guy that didn't hesitate kicking in a door in Iraq or Afghanistan. Whatever was on the other side of that door in Iraq or Afghanistan, they were confident that they would be able to handle it. But whatever happens to be on this side of this door, they're thinking, man, it's so huge, I don't know what to do. So there's the internal stigma there that will keep a veteran from seeking support. And I'll tell you, a veteran does not need much of a reason not to go see a mental health counselor. So any type of barrier, they go in the wrong door, it happens to be like, oh, that must be a sign, I don't need to go.
I don't have the time.
It's so anything that could keep a veteran from accessing these services is a busy signal. I mean, and it's not even that, the idea of where they heard sometime last year that the National Suicide Prevention Hotline was kicking over to answering machines and stuff. The idea that happened, veterans will say, well, I'm not going to call them because that's going to happen. And so it's almost the anticipation of a barrier that it's going to be a barrier. Now, that's no longer true. They've opened up another call center in Atlanta. They've doubled their staff. I have, as a mental health provider, I've reached out and I've even checked to see how responsive they are with the national hotline. And I went on the online chat and they connected me within a minute and a half. I mean, I timed it. I was thinking cynically that, no, it was 90 seconds or 85 seconds. I had somebody online. He was a vet, and he kind of taught me through the process. And so sometimes even that anticipation of a barrier would be enough to keep a veteran. So the internal barrier is huge. And then the other thing is the external barrier, the environmental influences. There is a stigma against mental health in general in America. I mean, we call it what it is. And so that's sort of the idea of a veteran doesn't want to perpetrate I don't want to be another guy who's thinking, that society sees that's another crazy combat vet. I don't want to help, perpetuate that stereotype. So that is an issue. Peer stigma is a big issue. I got a Jeep. My Jeep is pretty recognizable. It's like Legos for guys, right? You put stuff on and take stuff off. Well, if I was active duty and my guys, everybody knows what my Jeep looks like, it would be sometimes in some ways more appropriate for them if my appropriate route, or if my Jeep were outside of a strip club or a bar instead of a mental health counseling agency, and those things, me being married, it's not good for me to be, at those places where it's helpful for me to be at a mental health counseling agency. But that would generate more whispers and oh, dude, did you see Sergeant Francis stuff? Was it and that stigma is really starting to change from what I'm understanding. But there is that base level peer-to-peer kind of stigma against reaching out and talking to mental health. And I think as it's growing and as more people talk about it, that seems to be less. But that coupled with the idea that what are they going to think of me, it really is going to be a big issue.
Yeah.
And then really it's just access to care. And I have a lot of providers that I know at the VA that they're great people. They're really good people. They're dedicated to helping veterans. But the system that's in place and the volume of veterans receiving care, it's really kind of overwhelmed. And so that's why I think that civilian providers can and should come along and support the VA in a complementary way. In no way am I saying that we need to be, that all veteran mental health needs to be outsourced, because the VA does great things that I can't do. I kind of tell people that I'm a light infantry strike force where I can be agile and I can be responsive. And if a veteran came in my office today, if he called in and said, hey, can you see me this afternoon? Sure, I've got space, or I've got space tomorrow, and I can see them very quickly. However, the VA is more like a combined arms battalion where they have so much stuff that they can bring to bear in a depth way. So that's what my program is based on, is let's get you connected to mental health counseling. Let's get you familiar with what it's like, and then let's see where you're going to go in the long term, because the long term is really where you're going to get a lot of the healing.
And so you work directly with the VA for these handoffs, is that correct?
I do. I often say, for me, I like working with the VA rather than for the VA, or even with the DoD, and it is a partnership. But yes, and especially where in my local VA here in Colorado Springs, maybe the veteran's appointment isn't for another 45 days. Well, I have the ability, me and the interns that work with me in the program have the ability to cover them until that 45 days is up, and then connect them to make the direct referral to the VA or the vet center. A lot of veterans are not familiar with what the vet center is and what the vet center does. So I'll get a veteran that comes in to see me and say, hey, you know what, you should 3 tours in Iraq, brother, you need to be at the vet center, because they really have the resources. And then we connect them with the vet center, and maybe their appointment's 2 weeks out. We're able to see them until they get connected to the vet center, and then it rolls on. And then the other clinicians here on the family care center side, we're all VA choice providers. And so eventually, if it gets to the point where the veteran goes back to the VA, says, you know what, I'm already being seen here. Hey, can I go be seen there with choice? Then we provide them services through the VA Choice program. So the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency program is specifically a gap measure in order to connect that veteran until the long-term services that they have available.
That's awesome. That's excellent that you're working with them and that you're providing that gap that a lot of people that are going into the VA, that's one of the things that I hear is it takes so long to get anywhere. So you're able to provide the help until that starts up.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is the gap could be months, or in some cases it's almost years.
Wow.
For these veterans. Well, I'm thinking Vietnam guys. It's been decades, and some of the gap is a self-imposed gap, is what I'm saying. Is I've had guys that were in OIF 1 during the invasion, and here we are, 16 years, I think, or 15 years, just hit 15 years a couple days ago. And he, 6, 8, 10 years before he actually finally said, you know what, I think I'm going to reach out and do something. So it's a gap sometimes on the side of we call it the bureaucracy because we know what it is, but also it's on the veteran.
Duane, I know that there's at least one person out there listening to this that falls in this category. What would you say to a veteran that says, yeah, I already tried treatment, it didn't work?
Well, I say that, when my water pump blew on the Jeep probably a month and a half ago, I didn't like the first mechanic I talked to, so I had to keep looking around until I found a mechanic that I liked that could fix what I need to fix. I mean, that's really it is, the engine still needs to be fixed. My wife and I, when we bought our house, we didn't like our first realtor, but we still needed to buy a house. So we looked around until we found a realtor that we like because the engine needs to be fixed, the house needs to be bought. And it goes back to that idea of a veteran really doesn't need a reason to avoid mental health counseling services. And so we keep looking until we find somebody that we do click with, because the problem's not going to go away, the challenges are not going to go away, and there is someone out there that you're able to connect with. You just got to keep looking and never stop trying. We didn't quit when we were in the military. We have that same no quit attitude available to us when we get out.
Absolutely. Do you work with other veteran organizations to maybe complement the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's the big thing is I had a mentor of mine that he talked about the idea of an agency of agencies, is that I specifically am working on outpatient clinical mental health counseling. I'm not doing resumes. I'm not doing mock interviews. I'm not doing housing support. And so this is one of the reasons why I started the nonprofit, because, of course, who needs another veteran nonprofit these days? And I was really hesitant to kind of put it forward because there are so many. But I noticed that, especially in my area, this was a need that wasn't being addressed and couldn't be addressed in the private sector. And so there are other agencies, especially here in Colorado Springs, that are local. But then, national agencies, Hire Heroes USA, things like that a case manager, somebody is working with the veteran. They say, you know what, I'm getting the sense that your concerns are a little more outside of what I can do. Hey, I know a guy. Let me let you talk to this guy and let me show you what he's talking about and see if he can help you. So we've had some success in both ways where other agencies have said, you know what, we could see that there's something a little more for you, and they send to us. But if I get a guy that says, he's struggling, and in some of the stuff that he's struggling is the housing or the employment, that I connect them with those other agencies.
Excellent. And there's something to be said for some of the other agencies that you wouldn't even think of, or the other organizations that you wouldn't even think of. I have seen time and time again the mission continues, and Team Red, White, and Blue, and Team Rubicon, and these organizations that empower veterans to step up in their communities. And by connecting with these, I've heard stories where people said that they were on the brink of suicide, but all of a sudden they got connected with this organization, and now that purpose that you were talking about earlier, where the person that I was, who I knew myself as, this infantryman or this personnel sergeant that I knew myself to be, is gone now. Now what do I do? Well, they go and they work with Team Rubicon, and they are now put back in action with a new purpose that gets them excited to wake up and jump out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, that's exactly it. A lot of these, and I call them and I was actually speaking to somebody with Team Rubicon, and I used the term VSO. He says, "Oh, we're not a VSO." But what because it is, and there are, and I can tell you that the VFW in Denver, especially here, is doing a lot to reform into the next era. But programs, organizations like the Mission Continues and RWB and Team Rubicon are really a different type of veteran organization that, like you said, it provides purpose and meaning. It provides that sense of connection. And the thing about those organizations is they're working on veteran mental health, and they do have mental health professionals. I know that Team Rubicon, especially regionally, has at least one sort of mental health and wellness coordinator. I know here in Colorado they do. But it's not done in conjunction fully with clinical mental health counseling. And so there's an aspect of, if everybody's talking about mental health, but clinical mental health professionals are not involved in the discussion, are we truly doing as best as we possibly can?
Right.
And so that's where we try to come alongside with and provide that. Because the mental health profession really is sort of like, I have this great product, I have this great, and trust me, it works, everybody. Veterans, trust me. If you come in and you sit down, just trust me and it'll work. And that's not how, although it would be great if it works like that, it's not, which is really about a lot of the outreach and the advocacy and the talking, the writing that I do, that kind of tries to be that voice in the wilderness that points back to behavioral health.
Yeah, and I think it means a lot too to your patients that you are somebody that they can rely on, who's been there, they've done that, and you would probably better understand what it is they're talking to. It doesn't mean that other mental health professionals who haven't been through it don't also understand what it is they're talking about. But I think in their mind, they see you as somebody who fits better.
Yeah, I mean, it does break down that kind of initial hesitancy. I mean, it is a shortcut. You come in my office and it looks like a retired first sergeant's office, which is what it kind of, it actually is. I got maps on the wall and my guidon hanging up. And yeah, so guys, you come in here and they're like, okay, this guy gets it. He understands. But at the same time, and like you said, you don't need to be a veteran in order to be a mental health counselor. I have a lot of outstanding colleagues that are very skilled, that take the time to learn and understand what military culture is like, to be able to overcome that initial hesitation. So I'm not somebody that says only a combat vet can treat a combat vet. Number one, there's not nearly enough of us in the mental health counseling to be able to
Right.
address the need. But it does kind of end up shortcutting the process a little bit. Now, that being said, I've had to, guys come in my office, men and women will come in my office, and the first day they want to tell me about the worst thing ever. I'm like, whoa, slow down, right? Let's get you some coping techniques. Let's start to understand what's going on, because they're like, they want to tell their story. And this is a lot of the paradox is, I both want to tell my story, but nobody's going to drag it out of me. And figuring out how to resolve that paradox is the key. And mental health professionals, whether or not they're veterans, have the ability to help resolve those kind of paradoxes.
Duane, there's one more thing I want to ask you before we get into the final three. Is there any success story that you can talk about without, you don't need to go into specifics or names or anything like that, but do you have any success stories that you'd like to share?
And that's something that's kind of tricky, in that it's all confidentiality, and even any success stories that I have, I don't have permission to share. I mean, that's sort
Gotcha.
but the thing is when you ask me that, I have, 6, 7, 8, 9, I have seen veterans' lives changed. Not just through counseling, but also just through sort of the comprehensive getting them connected to services. But yeah, I mean, I've seen veterans that they didn't understand why they're putting their fist through the door. They didn't understand why the full moon is freaking them out, or and of course they didn't understand really how to tie something that they saw and didn't prevent in Iraq, kept them, is still carrying that weight, all these years later. And by taking the time to sit down and say, well, is that really how you remembered it? Is there any other way that you can think of that it might have happened? And so, again, really without being able to explain specifics, there are a lot of success stories. And I think that's some of the challenge with the mental health profession is it is confidential. And, and even if I were to tell you some of the specific ideas, one of the veterans who worked with me, they could be listening to it and they could say, you know what, that's me. And that's really kind of we don't want that to happen. We don't want to put that out to be able to say that anybody's able to identify what they shared in a session to be out in the open.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's a challenge for mental health professionals to be able to, we have these great and wonderful stories, and then ethically we're bound by confidentiality, even morally, to protect the stories of these veterans. So it's very hard to both promote the successes of the mental health counseling industry, as well as to kind of hold off on it and not put it out there. So it's really a balance.
Yeah. Yep. I totally understand. It's one of those things that I try to ask to different organizations when they come on. Just really, it's selfish. I love to hear success stories. So, but
right.
I totally get it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's and a lot of times veterans themselves will come out and say, man, this was great and things like that. But there's the whole aspect of confidentiality and really just protecting and honoring the stories and the experiences.
Okay, I think we are ready for the final three. Let's start off. First one, who would you like to hear on a future episode of the Veteran Resource Podcast?
There's actually a couple that I'd thought of, and one I mentioned before, Jeffrey Adamek. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Jeff's a former Special Forces guy that has really been vocal about trying to break down the stigma against help seeking and sort of that identity. So Jeff would be a great guest just from the the kind of the experience standpoint. And then there's somebody as passionate about her cause as I am about mine, and that's Justine Evers. I think she's the senior program specialist for service to school, and so her focus on veterans in higher education is as passionate as I am in veterans mental health. So yeah, Justine and Jeff would be a couple of good guests.
Excellent. I will try to reach out to them and see if we can get them on. Okay, question number 2. What upcoming project has you fired up right now?
Really, it's an ongoing project that I'm continuously fired up about, that I thought that I would not be, but kind of am. So besides doing what I'm doing here in Colorado Springs as direct services, I also write for a wider audience of veterans and their families on my blog, and you can find it at veteranmentalhealth.com. The idea behind this is there's veterans outside of Colorado Springs that I want to be able to speak to. And then there's counselors who may not be veterans that want to understand a little bit about what veterans are going through. And so what I've found is the blog has really been able to help veterans understand a little bit more. A lot of the stuff we talk about, all of the stuff that I was talking about before with some of the experiences is kind of on there. And, and I've had mental health counselors that have printed it off and said, hey, this is what we were talking about, Liz. What do you think? Or I've had veterans who have read something that have reached out to me and said, hey, you know what? Something you said kind of shifted something in for me. And do you think I should get counseling? And pretty much absolutely every time the answer is yes. But I'm able to connect them. And so I'm listing some mental health specific resources on the website. But yeah, that's a project that really it's been going for just over a year now, and it's really passionate about it.
Excellent. I will make sure I put the link to that in the show notes, make it very easy for people to find.
Yep.
And the final question here, the brain stretcher. If you woke up tomorrow and you found out that somebody made an anonymous donation of $10 million to your organization, what would you do with it?
And that is, it's the big question. And I've thought about it before, and I listened to some of your episodes. Man, what would I do? And for me, I think that I would develop what we're doing as a resource for other mental health providers to do the same thing. And it's all about replicability, is to be able to provide a place for mental health professionals that are working with veterans to learn more, to understand more. And there's a lot of great places that are, the training, like Psych Armor is doing some excellent stuff on training community providers on military cultural competency. But that's what I would really like to see, is to be able to show how we have taken this model of for-profit, nonprofit partnership, and how other agencies can do the same thing.
Excellent. Well, Duane, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of this. I really want the word to get out there to veterans about what it is you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'm a firm believer, and I say it often, is the guns usually don't go silent whenever we come back from combat, and so veterans should not have to go silent. And what you and say me with the blog, and we have the power to do some really great work in the world. We just have to step out and do it. And so I think what you're doing with the podcast is great, and I wish you all the luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have a great one.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Veteran Resource Podcast. As always, please go and check out the show notes. You can find them at veteranresourcepodcast.com/096, and you can get all of the information on Duane and all of the links to get connected to everything that he has going on. Make sure you check out his blog and pass it on to some other people. Everybody can benefit from hearing this episode. And while you're at it, have you liked the Facebook page yet? Come on, it'll take you like a second. It's one button click. Just go to facebook.com/Veteran Resource Podcast. It'll take you to the Facebook page. You'll like it. Once you do that, you'll start to get all of the stuff that I'm posting out about new episodes, about new things that we're going to be doing. I've got some ideas, and I'm hoping to be implementing them really soon. That's all I have for you today, and I'll see you tomorrow for episode 97.